get chatting in. Thanks for doing that. We'll give a couple more minutes for attendees to join, and then we'll get started with our event. Thanks everyone for joining us. If you are just logging in, say hello in the chat box and where you are zooming in from. Looks like we have some people that got rain last night, which is super exciting. All right, I'm going to go ahead and run through a couple of housekeeping items, and then we will begin our event. So again, if you're just joining us, go ahead and say hello in the chat and where you're zooming in from. Throughout the presentation, we are going to be hearing from a couple of local leader panelists and their climate perspectives, as well as you know, Representative Axne. So there will be a chance at the end of the event to ask the panelists some questions. So if you think of a question as they're speaking today throughout the event, please use the question and answer box to the left of the chat. Make sure if you have a question for one individual panelist, you make sure and say which panelist you are asking the question of so that we can get that to the right person. Okay, again, thanks for joining us today. And the schedule today will be each of the three panelists will be able to introduce themselves after we hear from Representative Axne. She will be logging in right at 10 and will be with us for half an hour. So she will give her remarks, and then we will hear from those three panelists. And then there will be a dialogue between the panelists and Representative Axne for 10 minutes. And then we might be able to pull a question or two for Representative Axne before she leaves. And then the last 15 minutes, so from 10:30 to 10:45, we will be able to have the panelists answer the questions that you have for them. So again, if you have questions throughout the presentation, make sure you use the question and answer box next to the chat, and make sure you say which panelist your question is for. We will be recording this event, and it is already recording and live on Facebook. So if you want to watch it back, we will be sending that out in an email after the event, as well as it will be saved on our Facebook page on the Iowa Interfaith Power and Light, as well as the Center for Rural Affairs Facebook pages. So if you wanted to watch anything back. Again, we will have from 10 to 10:30 with Representative Axne, and then the following 15 minutes will be for the three panelists answering questions. I think that's all the housekeeping. I want to introduce myself. My name is Kayla Bergman. I'm with the Center for Rural Affairs. The Center for Rural Affairs is a nonprofit founded in 1973 in Northeast Nebraska. The organization is based in Lyons, Nebraska, in that Northeast corner, and exists to create vibrant rural communities. We have staff throughout Nebraska, as well as staff in South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa. I am personally based in our Nevada, Iowa office with 3 colleagues in this office with me. I'm going to turn over to Matt to introduce himself and his organization.
Thank you, Kayla. I'm the executive director of Iowa Interfaith Power and Light, and we're an statewide interfaith organization that works to empower Iowans of faith and conscience to take bold and just action on climate change. And we do a number of programs, really working with the child. Our call to people is who God needs is who you are. And so it's really about helping us identify our who we are as people of faith, as parents, as farmers, as students, as faith leaders, as teachers. Whoever we are, grounded in our faith, is who God needs for us to solve the climate crisis. And really, the climate crisis is part of our call to environmental justice. So I think at this time, unless someone interrupts me, I'm going to call us to prayer, to reflection and prayer, so that when Representative Axne arrives, we're ready to go right into her presentation, because she has a limited time. And as we always do at Iowa IPL, we try to gather in reflection. And this morning, I want to start with our reflection from the UN Environmental Sabbath Program. And this is from Earth Prayers from Around the World, edited by Elizabeth Roberts and Elias Amadon. We join with the earth and with each other to bring new life to the land, to restore the waters, to refresh the air. We join with the earth and with each other to renew the prairies, to care for the plants, to protect the creatures. We join with the earth and with each other to celebrate the rivers, to rejoice in the sunlight, to sing the songs of the stars. We join with the earth and with each other to recreate the human community, to promote justice and peace, to remember our children. We join with the earth and with each other. We join together as many and diverse expressions of one loving mystery for the healing of the earth and the renewal of all life.
Thanks, Matt. So we have a couple of minutes until Representative Axne joins us. So I'm going to, again, run through a couple of housekeeping items for you and then introduce the panelists before she gets here. So again, our schedule, Representative Axne will be here from 10 to 10:30, and she will be giving some remarks right at 10. And then each of the panelists will be sharing their climate perspectives, and then there will be 10 minutes of dialogue between them. Again, we will be able to pull a couple of questions from the participants during that time. So if you do have a question for any of the panelists or Representative Axne, please write those in the question and answer box to the left of the chat. If they are for an individual and not the whole group, make sure you identify which panelist or speaker you are asking the question of today. If you are live on Facebook, make sure you do the same format for questions in the comment box. So you can just comment in the comment section, and we actually have somebody that will be transferring it over to the Zoom so that we can see those questions as well. Again, we will be recording this event, and so if you want to watch it back, we'll be sending that out to all participants that registered, as well as it will be saved on Facebook. So you will be able to review the event. Okay, well, I will kind of give a brief overview of each of the, or introduce each of the panelists before Representative Axne joins us. So first off, we have Seth Watkins from Clarinda, Iowa. He's a farmer, and that I believe is in Page County, correct, Seth? Oh, here we go. Thank you. Yeah, panelists, you're welcome to turn your video on. Here we go. Perfect.
Okay.
And then we have Michelle Franks, the Executive Director of Golden Hills RC&D, which is a nonprofit based out of Oakland, Iowa. And then we have Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Thompson of the Burns United Methodist Church in Des Moines. Thank you all for joining us today. Again, we will be able to hear from you just after Representative Axne joins and gives her opening remarks. And it looks like we have her joining now.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are all of you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Look at that beautiful background. I think that's in Pottawatomie County. I know we've got some Pottawatomie County folks here.
Love it. Love it. All right, Matt, we'll be able to turn our videos off here and let you roll.
Okay. All right. Well, Cindy Axne is a fifth-generation Iowan. She's a former 4-H member, 6-on-6 basketball player alumni, a small business owner, parent, community activist, member of Sacred Heart Catholic Church, and U.S. representative from Iowa's 3rd Congressional District. But most importantly today, and for today's forum, she's helping Iowans lead in finding and implementing solutions to the climate crisis. Welcome, Representative Axne. Thank you for joining us today for this important discussion of Iowa climate solutions.
Well, I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you for all of our hosts who have put this together. I'm really grateful to see all of you joining to talk about this really important topic. I know that many of you have worked on this for years. I so appreciate you bringing it into the faith for people to understand how important it is, not just for our planet, but for the people that live here, to ensure that we're looking at the issues of climate change and how they impact people's lives, because certainly those who live on the margins, who have the least opportunity to have their voice heard, to have the funding that they need to withstand the difficulties that we face with climate change, are the ones who are the most impacted. And so I'm so grateful to have all of you here who are working so hard on that issue for so many people, to make sure that we've got an opportunity to address the climate crisis and also steward people through that process. I did want to go over some of the things that we're working on right now. And I'll tell you, folks, it's been a priority in our House to ensure that we're looking at things from a climate eye. And that doesn't just mean with specific policy in place. It also means that within our respective committees, we are looking at ways to bring climate into looking at policy that could work for that. So for instance, I sit on the Financial Services Committee, and we are dedicated to making sure that we've got opportunity for folks to look at climate as an entrepreneurial opportunity, because we believe that it's going to bring a lot of job opportunities to folks, as well as help us with the issues that we're dealing with our environment. And we know that we've got a responsibility to look at our financial systems within this country and businesses to ensure that they're appropriately addressing the concerns that we're facing now and in the future when it comes to climate. So there are a lot of opportunities within the House for us to be able to look at issues of climate. I'd like to point out just a few of them, and I want to make sure I don't forget them. So I brought a few notes here with me. What I just talked about a second ago was about the work that we could do within our committees. And so for example, to give to you was a bill that I've been a part of, which is the National Climate Bank. And the National Climate Bank actually establishes, I'm going to find the exact money, $35 billion of federal funds that can leverage more than $1 trillion in total investment. These things go for updated infrastructure, improving energy efficiency, financing projects that will move us towards a clean energy environment and push our economy towards clean energy at the same time. So that's something that I was behind, that we passed out of the House. And as a matter of fact, it made it into HR 2, our Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator piece. This amendment was added to it. So we found a way within financial services to ensure that we are participating in helping out with the issues that we're facing across this country when it comes to clean energy. I want you to also know that as we've moved throughout COVID-19, we have not forgotten that this is a pressing issue. And for many people, all supporters, this is a #1 issue, and we have not forgotten that. And so we have made sure that within the policies that we've put in place or tried to get passed into law, that we're addressing the clean energy issues as well. So for example, in March, I signed on to a letter urging the clean energy workforce in coronavirus relief. So we're trying to put into our relief packages opportunity for people to go back into, help us with the renewable energy, but not just that, support our clean energy sector as everyone has taken an unfortunate dive economically during these really difficult times. In June, I joined my colleagues to send a letter to House leadership asking for changes for clean energy tax incentives to make sure that those were extended through COVID, because a lot of times policy doesn't work when other things are being put on top of it during emergency times like this. Specifically, this was requesting that the investment tax credit, the ITC, or the production tax credit, the PTC, be received as a direct payment, because many firms right now are unable to leverage this credit because of inability of financing. So we're always trying to find ways as we move through issues to ensure that we're protecting the policy around climate as well, which is what this piece did. And we urged our leadership to make sure that we're taking care of this as we deal with the difficulties with COVID. And then in July, we passed HR2, the Moving Forward Act, which is our big infrastructure bill, which is really focused on climate. So much of the pieces within the infrastructure bill move us in the right direction to a net zero economy, move us to the direction of clean energy, ensure that what we're doing in this country from an infrastructure package on the very baseline, things like roads and bridges, we're addressing in a way that addresses our climate issues and is also environmentally friendly. So we've passed that bill during this whole time as well. But I'd say the biggest thing that's happening right now, in addition to really making sure that we stand up for climate amidst an administration that unfortunately wants to take us backwards. So we've signed on written bills to put us back in the Paris Climate Accord, things like that we're trying to do to ensure that we're defending our environment and defending America's inclusion in climate issues around the world. But in addition to that, we're trying to get agendas out there that will move us forward in the right direction. In particular, when we know that when there will be leadership, hopefully across the board in both the House and the Senate or the presidency, that understands what an important topic climate is and how important it is to address this. So very early on in our term, 116th Congress, Speaker Pelosi structured the Select Task Force on Climate, put one of my colleagues, friends, and representatives, Representative Castor from Florida, in charge of the Select Task Force on Climate. This moves us towards a net zero economy by 2050, but it moves us also in the second half of this century towards a net negative society. So that's a very ambitious goal, and it establishes interim targets to help us get there. There's multiple industries that are addressed in this Select Task Force on Climate Policy paper, which came out to be about 500 pages and is being used to put policy into place. As I mentioned before, we use all that information to be thinking about what these bills look like, but we'll be taking that massive piece of information and data gathering and using it to ensure that the bills that we put forth to address climate will really hit the mark. And so we took all the different industries, the folks that were part of this, and really looked at how we can improve that. Well, I found out that they were working on this, and I wanted to make sure that Iowa wasn't being left behind, and that beautiful farm scene that you see behind me actually had opportunity and wasn't being looked at strictly from the perspective of the impact that agriculture has on climate, but opportunities that we could have here in agriculture on climate. So I went up to Kathy Castor and I said, "Did you know that Iowa's #2 in wind production in the country?" I did not know that. Well, I do, because I ran the state's energy and environment plan and helped make that a possibility for us. Did you know we're 16th when it comes to solar? Did you know that if we could get broadband to every corner of this country and out to places in rural Iowa, we could use precision agriculture, meaning we could control input on every inch of land that we farm, helping us control water input, pesticides, runoff, tilling that impacts carbon, giving us opportunity to figure out how we can find solutions to impact climate. And she's like, "I did not know that." So I had an opportunity to be a part of putting some of that information together in that policy, myself and another colleague on Agriculture Committee, to ensure that when they're looking at an industry that's really important to the state of Iowa, to provide jobs and put food on the table for not just the people in our district, but of course this great state and this great country, that we're looked at as a partner and somebody who is solving this problem along with government, because that's really how it should be. And that's how we're going to get people involved. So we were able to get some good pieces in there, also meaning that farmers will have a seat at the table. Iowa will have a seat at the table when it comes to agriculture and climate, when we craft a really intensive bill that I know will someday be there, and hopefully sooner than later. But for a few key aspects, so that you know, some of the key pieces that came out in this policy piece regarding agriculture is to increase carbon sequestration and reduce greenhouse gases by increasing financial assistance to farmers to deploy conservation programs, expand the USDA's research on climate change, reduce food waste. Food waste is one of my, I tell you folks, that hurts me, pains me, the food waste in this country. So reduce food waste and transportation emissions by supporting local and regional food systems, which I think is really important. And we've seen as COVID has impacted the state and our meatpacking plants, how important it is to get back to more regional processing. And then establish a low carbon fuel standard to help us build on the RFS and increase demand for clean biofuels. So we're already seeing an opportunity for our state to not just be key players in addressing the issues that we're facing, but bring opportunity to the people that live here as well. That's just a little bit of what's a slice of what's happening in Congress to focus on climate, to focus on our environment. I hope that I can stick around in this seat and represent all of you and your voices in Washington as we move forward into another Congress, which will be the beginning stages of discussing the next farm bill, which could be incredibly impactful in dealing with climate and helping economically every single person involved in rural America and certainly in rural Iowa. So thank you so much for having me on here for this discussion with these great folks. Thank you for all the work that you do. We couldn't do this without each other helping one another. And I know that that is at the baseline of everything that you do. And the framework is help people live better lives and to make sure that you're a voice for those who don't have one when it comes to things like this. So thank you so much for all that you do. And I'm so proud to be your voice in Washington.
Thank you, Representative Axne. My name is Kayla Bergman with the Center for Rural Affairs based out of our Nevada office. I will be emceeing the rest of the event and want to introduce to you our panelists from your district. So first off, we have Seth Watkins. He's a farmer from Clarinda, Iowa, and I'll give him a couple of minutes to introduce himself and tell his climate story.
All right. Hi, Congresswoman. Thank you for being with us. And this will be pretty quick, but essentially what I've learned from other farmers and Leopold Center at Iowa State and gosh, NRCS and a lot of groups is that when I start to reduce my carbon footprint with some practices like no-till, utilization of cover crops, I'm fortunate I still raise cattle so I can utilize grazing. It's been a very good way to care for the type of land we have in your district. So I'm looking, you're sitting with a background of the Luss Hills and then the Southern Iowa Drift Plains, some of those areas. We have challenges unique to us that aren't the same as farmers may face in the Des Moines Lobe or some of our other production areas. But long story short, the more I have reduced my carbon footprint, the more I've lowered my costs and the more good things have come from it. This is a real challenge because the reality is our current farm bill focuses directly on the conversion of marginal land to tillable land and focuses on production. It incentivizes these things and really, to be quite blunt, doesn't always incentivize us to do the right thing. And we're seeing the externalities from it. We can even talk about ethanol. I understand the frustrations people are seeing and the frustrations we're seeing from the waivers that I know you're trying to get done away with. But to a certain degree, we came in with this production and we subsidized it and we incentivized more production. And then we realized we had to do something. So then we came in with ethanol, which is a subsidized fuel source, which led to more production and more conversion of marginal land. And I guess in a nutshell, it's just really decimated our landscape and some of our opportunities. So wrapping up in one sentence, I tried to write this down as well as I could. Our ag practices, our farm bill needs to incentivize the regeneration of the natural resources we depend upon, and not, unfortunately, its destruction like we're doing right now. This simply means that to a certain degree, there's some practices that do pollute, whether it's CAFOs or feedlots, and we feed cattle also. But I think we're at a point when we look at how much money is available to spend, we really need to target our efforts on those practices that regenerate and protect our natural resources that we all depend upon. And, you know, speaking as someone whose brother is a retired oil executive, if your practices pollute or destroy resources beyond a sustainable rate, and there's a better way to do it, then I think a very basic starting place is you should internalize those costs in your operation so we have more money to go into other things.
Representative Axne, do you want to respond to Seth, or would you like me to move on to the other panelists?
It's whatever you would like. I'm happy to. Sure. Seth, it's so good to see you.
You too.
You know, listen, I'm so grateful for the practices that you put in place, and we have so many great stewards of our environment here in Iowa. And I agree with you. That's why I'm anxious to stay there, work on the farm bill, which won't be in this next term, but will be, I believe, the next one. But we'll begin the stages of it, obviously. And it's really important that we have people representing row crop states that understand that we've got to be, we have to conserve our soil. We've got to conserve our water. We've got to conserve our land. We've got to make sure that we've got the opportunity in 25 years that, you know, my grandpa had when I was growing up, with the, you know, wonderful nutrients in his soil that have in many cases been depleted across our state. And so I couldn't agree with you more. We have farmers across the state who want to do different crops. You know better than I do, certainly with your background, that at any given point in time in the history of the state, we were, 12 to 15 crops. We, to your point, and why I brought up processing, we have such limited ability to produce, other types of plants and that people would like to harvest because of the way that we're structured in government and the way that we've subsidize people to, make the decisions that they do. I tell this to people all the time who don't understand anything about agriculture. I said, our farmers are really forced into a position where for them to be able to put food on their table and to afford some things in life that, they've got to conform to the way essentially that government has subsidized agriculture for them to be able to be successful for their families. And, what that's done is increase, I think, taken away opportunity for us to be diverse when it comes to the types of crops that we grow, for us to be able to, your point, put in more cover crops and do more CRP, to do all the things that we would like to do. So I agree with you. We've got to make sure that within policy, we're not constantly incentivizing whether it's thinking about our corn or soybeans, or whether it's thinking about other industries that we're incentivizing that we could probably move away from and look to cleaner energy and figure out how to make that happen. We've got to do that. We're at that point. We're at a point in this country where we've got to take this up to the next level. And that means really looking at everything holistically and being, and ensuring that those farmers who, like you described, who might be more, everything for them is based on, corn and soybeans and their subsidies. And we've got to figure out how we can transition people to other products and we also need to create new markets for those. So it's a whole, this as well as I do. It's not just we tell one person to do one thing or we can have an opportunity to put it in place. Unless we put those structures in place, like production, processing, and markets, we don't have opportunities for people. So that's where it's going to be really important for us to think about holistically as a region, as a country, and as far as what individual farmers want to do and what's important to feed people in this country, because it pains me that we've got children in our own backyard who barely know where their one meal a day is going to come from in our state. That's terrible. Where are we as a state when we can't even feed our own children and we produce food in our backyard? So I think, to your point, Seth, I think there's so much opportunity. We're going to be able to work this in a way that benefits farmers, benefits rural economy, and does better by the whole entire ag industry than what we're currently seeing right now.
Thank you. All right, our next speaker is Michelle Franks. She's the Executive Director of Golden Hills RC&D, which is a nonprofit based in Oakland. Her nonprofit works in various natural resources protection related to climate, and she is welcome to share her story now.
Thank you. Like you, Representative Axne, I'm at least a fifth generation farm kid from Western Iowa, and mostly my dad's side of the family is from the Lost Hills, and that's where my family hails from. And so I've worked with Golden Hills RC&D for almost 7 years, and our organization was founded in 1981 in response to the farm crisis, built around the idea that the nexus between natural resource conservation and rural development, led by local people who can make the best decisions for themselves, is really kind of the mission of that we work under, and we've continued to do that. Golden Hills over the years has been involved with a number of initiatives, including local food system development, helping to develop alternative crops like the grape industry in Western Iowa, looking at ways of helping small poultry producers aggregate their product and process collectively. We're really kind of looking at that sort of small scale impacts that we can have with local people. And again, a lot of that is driven by interest and balance and areas that people within Southwest Iowa feel are important. And so, we've had an opportunity to work with a lot of farmers like Seth who are taking the lessons that we're hopefully teaching to people about the importance of the prairie ecotype or the prairie ecosystem, and how our original native growing system has benefits to some of our agricultural economy as well. And so prairies are very good at being able to retain water in times of drought. They're also able to filter water that is less than desirable back into our water systems. They're also able to regenerate the soil that they grow in. And so currently what we're involved with, there are things that are more reactionary rather than advocating for new things in relation to climate change. So as you know, in the last 15 years, our corner of the state has had 3 catastrophic floods. And I live in Mills County. And so I've seen firsthand what that has happened, how that's impacted our communities and our farmers and people that are living on the margins in those areas. And so currently we're working through the Iowa watershed approach and local landowners, both private and public, to implement about over $5 million worth of cost share projects that will help hold water when the next flood comes. And so what we're doing is reactionary stuff right now. I'd really like us to get to a point where there are resources that can help farmers like Seth and many other farmers in our area to be able to adapt and do practices that are more regenerative in nature rather than just responding to crisis changes. And I think long term, that's going to help our landowners, our stewards of the land, be able to withstand some of these severe weather events that we have seen, whether it's flood or it's drought or storms that are inland, hurricanes. I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from the way that the land and the plants and the ecosystems have historically grown in the Lost Hills and be adapted to a broader area. So again, so we're focused primarily on responding to local ideas, local wishes, local collaboration to address some of these issues. And I just appreciate your interest and advocacy for the work that's happening here.
Yeah, well, my pleasure, Michelle, and thank you so much for all you do. And unfortunately, I think you hit the nail on the head. Right now, I think for so many people, it's it's reactionary. We aren't able, as I mentioned to you, what am I doing right now? Working on how do we ensure that we support clean energy during COVID when the economy is literally falling apart, so that we don't lose sight of that. And those businesses who had actually been moving down the road, actually doing some positive things, can continue to receive the incentives, even though policy indicates they can't. What about, putting, this National Climate Bank, it's about chasing funding, getting funding into this whole thing. We're still not at a point, where we all of us know we need to be, which is leading the agenda for, God's earth and everyone that lives here on changing people's hearts and minds about protecting this great, wonderful universe of ours. And so I'm with you. So much. How long have we been talking about this? How many of you, just like me, have had a composter sitting in compost in Iowa in the middle of winter, for years on end, and have tried, have picked up garbage, have done all the little things, and knowing full well that the big, massive scale of things still needs to really get out there, and we continue to fight back against it. Certainly, we're fighting, unfortunately, within this administration. As in particular, we see, countries like Syria and others who have been so impacted, by climate, and why we've seen so much unrest there. And we see that this administration, doesn't understand these types of things, and doesn't understand that we need to get in and support and stay in accords and stay in and support countries and do the things that we need to do. So we're just not at a point right there, and we've all got to make that a priority. I hope that this is the time to do it. I hope that we have the impetus in government. I think we do, and I certainly believe that we've got it on the ground. And I think that people are getting frustrated. People want to know the impact of their life on our environment. And they're making it a priority to address it. So let's all keep working at this. I think, the day's coming where we're going to get some really solid pieces in place to really move us in the right direction, because right now, a lot of it is maintenance until we can make that happen, and ensuring that we're not hurting things any more than we already are. So thanks for the decades and years of work you've been doing, to make sure that we're helping our farmers, and just as you did with Seth, and couldn't be more grateful. This is the kind of conversations as we move towards another farm bill that I'll be wanting to have with all of you as we look at what that policy is going to look like.
If I could just jump in with one real quick thing. So there's a question that popped up about, how has COVID impacted the work here? And one of the things that we've seen is that more of the public is engaged with our natural spaces, with our parks, with our trails, than have ever been. And people are hiking through the Lost Hills for the first time ever. And I think that there is I think what I'm seeing, and again, not terribly scientific, but what I'm seeing is that people are more connected to the land. And because of this, they are, recognizing that there is a diversity of prairie plants that are growing in the hills, that there's this landscape that is unique in the world, that has done the dance with the Missouri River for eons. And, I think that this awareness that people are having of the natural spaces has been a positive thing that has come out of the pandemic. People are more inclined to do that. And hopefully we can capture that interest and build on a more individual connection to making your own mark with regards to climate, with conservation, and hopefully, keep moving that forward.
Very good.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, our last panelist is Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Thompson of Burns United Methodist Church in Des Moines, having the faith and climate perspective today.
Good morning, Representative Axne. How are things in DC?
We're ready to go.
Oh, that's frightening and perhaps a blessing. So anyway, I like to tell people that I used to work in a county with no stoplights, no movie theaters, and no high B. And now I work in a zip code with no Starbucks. So I have been to the far ends. When I lived in a small rural town, we always felt that all the attention and all the money was directed toward urban areas, or college towns. And now that I live in Des Moines and work at a 50314, we think that everything's directed to the richer zip codes and that we are left behind. And so I see a lot of similarities between where I work now and the small rural town where I used to work. And I was really intrigued with your National Climate Bank, because one of the things, there are several things, but one of the things I feel is missing is the help with infrastructure in our smaller communities and in our lower socioeconomic zip codes. We have individuals as well as businesses that cannot refit their structures, or their homes for clean energy. And sometimes it's just because a lack of folks that can do the work, as well as lack of money. And so that results in high energy bills, which results in sometimes evictions or energy shutoffs. And that is not the standard of living that we want to have for our folks that live in Iowa. Green spaces, especially in our urban areas, but also in our smaller communities. People think just because you're surrounded by farmland, you have access to trails and green spaces and parks, and that's not necessarily true. I lived in a community of 700 where 100 families came to the food bank because they were food insecure, surrounded by farms and all kind of corn and soybeans and product. And yet we had people that were food insecure. I'm a big one for public transportation. And what we've seen, it's not that we don't have public transportation, but the efficiency of our public transportation is not conducive to giving up cars, giving up that high carbon emission. It is not conducive to getting people to their jobs. Especially in rural communities, I lived in a town where the public transportation was only available Monday through Friday. And it was only available from 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the evening. Depending on your job situation, that doesn't work. Natural disaster recovery. I'm walking through a neighborhood right now where we still have trees that have not been taken care of. And if those are not taken care of, we're going to lose that canopy. We need to be replanting the trees that are lost. What that looks like in terms of, future generations. And then lastly, I'll just say that we need to educate our electorate on what all this means. We say climate change, we say environmental practices, we say we're going to be stewards of the land. I'm sure Seth and Michelle probably have a little easier time of that where they are, but where I am right now, a lot of our folks don't know what that means and they don't know how they can contribute to that. And so education, I believe, is important. I know our 4-H programs do great work in that area, Iowa State, some of our extension services, but still we need to make sure that that environmental education is reaching even down into our young people. And so, as we're saying, I'm just really glad to be part of this discussion. I'm glad what everyone has said, but I also want to remind people that, green space is more than a concrete ballpark. Thank you.
Yeah, Reverend, thank you so much for that. And you couldn't be more spot on in regard to the issues that we face in rural America, but also urban America and how closely those are tied. When I first started running for office, one of the first towns I visited was Mount Ayr in Ringgold County. They told me how they had to pool their money together out of their own pockets to buy new street lamps for the town square because there just was no money to make that happen. Now imagine if that happened here in the East Village or whatever in downtown Des Moines. Those business owners, those people who live down there and anybody else who wants to shop would expect that to be up and running within 24 hours. And yet these people waited months, to years to get new street lamps. I'll tell you what, when I got to Congress after the floods, Michelle. You know, we and got the funding for that and moved that agenda forward and got the policy in place and all that. I remember being on the floor and I was taking a vote and I looked up at the screen and people's votes up there and I thought, my goodness, there's 50 reps out of California and 40 out of New York and 30 out of Florida. And I could go on and on and on. I'm like, I've got to be the voice of 10 representatives if I'm going to get something done for this state. And I truly realized then at that point, even though I've been able to get some things done, that this is why states like Iowa have been left behind. We're outnumbered. We got, you know, even they might be Republicans and Democrats in California, they're still working together on a lot of the issues. And a lot of them are mostly on the same party anyhow, so they're really working together on the issues. And they're pushing agendas forward, and they're getting support for them. And it's why the majority of economic development money in this country, fully about half of it, goes to 3 states: California, New York, and Massachusetts. The rest of us eke out the rest of it. And imagine when you get down to a state like ours, lower population than some of the other states, even less urban centers, less representation, why we struggle, why Mount Air has to buy lights on their own. Because if we're still having trouble in the big urban areas, like you've said, Reverend, making sure people have what they need in those communities, and these are the urban areas with higher tax base and all that, imagine what our rural areas are like. We've got such a long way to go, folks, here in realizing that the equity across this country has been extremely limited. It's been heavily focused on the more populated states and those who've had more opportunity to get support for them all along. And then they capitalize on that and they and have greater opportunity as a result of it. So, you know, I'm listening to what you're saying, Reverend, and I'm seeing a tie into this whole conversation here, that this is the time where we can step up as a state who is so impactful when it comes to climate, who truly knows the answers to solving the problems when it comes to climate related to the agriculture industry, and have people listen to us. Because we're going to have an opportunity to bring viability to our farmers, to our rural communities, to our urban communities. Because when we can deploy new ways, new ways to farm, new products to bring to market, new processing opportunities, we create jobs. We create viability in rural communities and urban communities. And so I think it's, we're poised to be at a place here in Iowa to be at the forefront of opportunity, but it's going to take all of us from a local to a federal level to make sure everybody understands how relevant our voices are. And I would just close by you're saying too, when I talk to our farmers about the issues that we're facing, we just had the derecho, which has impacted our corn, but we also have drought right now in Southwest Iowa. Prior to that, we had a trade war. Seth, you talked about the renewable fuel standard waivers. And if you were in Mills County, some parts of Pott and Fremont, then last year you had the flood, and you've got silt on your land, and you can barely, a lot of it's not even, you can't farm it. We've been taking hit after hit, but if I ask my soybean farmers and we just talk trade war, they believe that we've lost, we'll lose a full 25% of our market. That's a lot. We expect to gain back 15% in a 10-year period, but that's only 15% over 10 years. So as we're moving down the road, we're still not getting what we were just trying to catch up. And so that, we'll never catch up. And so we've got to find new opportunities here for our farmers, because right now, and to Seth, to your point about all of our eggs in one basket, all of our eggs are in one basket. And when this administration is honestly not doing their job in negotiating an appropriate trade, and I think we need to hold China accountable. I don't have any issues with that. On many levels, they need to be held accountable, from current, making sure they don't manipulate markets and things like that. But we also have to make sure that we get things done. And so we've got to, make sure that we are stepping up and helping our farmers find new opportunity and new markets, helping people in our urban areas, Reverend, as you mentioned, be a part of that, because I think that they can be. I think they can be from a vendor perspective. I think they can be from a customer perspective. I've talked to my friend, Representative Akil Abdul Samad, who's here in the Des Moines area. He serves areas that are really underrepresented, that don't have a lot of opportunity, that are inner city. He wants to bring aquaponics there. We want to grow food for those communities. I think there's so much that we can do to tie in our more rural areas with our urban areas, work together and bring viability to everybody. And to your point, all of you have brought up, we've got to get people, back to understanding where their food comes from. It's why we've got to integrate these things into our urban areas. I can't tell you how many people I talk to that don't want, they feel like, oh, if I close my eyes and I don't have to recognize any of this, then it'll all be okay. Well, no, it won't, folks. If you don't like what's happening in a CAFO, if you don't like what's, happening to our environment, closing your eyes and not looking at it and just hoping somebody else is going to take care of it is not what's going to happen, because you don't want to recognize the way that some people don't want to recognize the way that they're a part of the process by just accepting the way things are structured. So we've got to start bringing urban and rural together when it comes to these things. And I think that's probably a fairly new thing within the Farm Bill itself. But we also know that Farm Bill represents things like SNAP. We've got to make sure that we're feeding all of our folks who need support. It helps with our schools, helps with food banks. All of USDA is huge when it comes to rural economic viability as well. So I'm looking forward to making sure that I am the voice of 10 representatives and joining with my colleagues to make us a state of 40 representatives, even though we only would have 4, and bringing these opportunities back here to Iowa.
Thank you to Representative Axne for participating in the conversation today. We are going to be sticking around for participants to get a chance to ask our panelists questions for a couple of minutes, but we at the Center for Rural Affairs and Iowa Interfaith Power and Light really appreciate you joining in today's discussion. Again, we're going to stick around, so you're welcome to leave if you have to go, but again, we really appreciate the discussion today.
Well, thank you so much. I have to hop off, but I do believe there may be some of my staff on, possibly hanging on to answer some questions. But thank you for all you do. Stay safe. And as I like to say, if you say a solid Cindy Axne distance away from people, that's a solid 6 feet, so you're good to go. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good one. Okay. Thanks again to the panelists for the discussion there. We have a couple of questions that have come in, and I will make sure to ask those to the individuals. First off, Seth, I wanted to start with you here. What federal policies or programs, if any, are important to you for addressing climate change that you are either participating in or would like to have available for participation? An example might be, the CSP program or any other conservation financial programs.
I think, I guess kind of bluntly, it's more, as I look at my fellow panelists, I'm reminded of all the places we need money in this country right now. And also it kind of drives home that right now, while it's necessary because of failed policy, agriculture is getting a lot of money that if we could do things a little differently, maybe that could go somewhere else. So I think the lowest hanging fruit I see, the thing I battle with the most is number one, the way we handle federal crop insurance on highly erodible land and wetlands. We have an oversupply of grain. This is our problem, and it drives down the price. Yet we have actually incentivized the conversion of this kind of land and continue to incentivize it. And in reality, I think we'd be much better off either actually enforcing compliance on that. If you're going to farm that kind of land, you have to make sure that the soil loss is below a sustainable rate. Or maybe it's time, or say, what if we go back to what we know works? What if we applied technology and some common sense and went back to paying farmers for ecological services by actually using supply management and putting that highly erodible land and wetlands back into wild spaces and grazing and let it do its job. The specific example I use right now in our county, I've got 160 acres of CRP that I've been slowly converting back to pasture, but it's been 100% out of pocket because our county's budget is exhausted on manure systems for CAFOs. And that's why I made the comment. We would have no problem giving me $20 or $30 an acre in federal crop insurance to farm that piece of land, which it should never ever be farmed. And by converting it to pasture, I've put it in permanent cover. I've created some jobs for the people that build fence. We've done some things where we're doing our best to restore habitat, but it literally is a labor of love, for lack of better words. And when I look at the needs for whether it be education funding or infrastructure funding or other things that we need desperately in our counties, I look at the number of kids on free and reduced lunch. I think, why are we funneling this kind of money into us doing the wrong thing? And it's hard for us as farmers. You know, you've got to feed your family, but at the same time, Iowa's farmers are an incredible resource and an incredible treasure. And it'd be wonderful if we could just have the tools instead of, you know, I think they called it freedom to farm when I started. I just want freedom to do the right thing.
Thanks, Seth. The next question is for Jackie. How does faith and climate interact in your opinion? And maybe a follow-up question would be, how do you use your faith network to educate on climate issues?
Well, I believe as a person of faith that I have been called to be a steward of resources, and I call the people that I pastor to that same call. What was the second question? Remind me again.
How do you use your network within?
Oh, okay. All right. And so, yeah, so, you know, as in my particular tradition, we have a set of principles that are our guidelines for how to protect our environment, how to conserve resources. And I have to admit, it's very difficult, especially during this time. You know, you think about all the renewable resources that we use that now seem to be kind of taking a backseat to combating the virus. But my biggest one is food. When I taught, I used to tell students that the food we throw away in the garbage can could feed a small country. And so I just remind people that, you know, food is an opportunity to live simply so others can simply live. We have plenty of food in this country, like Seth was saying. There's plenty of food. Our farmers are doing a tremendous amount of work. It isn't being distributed properly. And so to work on that distribution is one of the areas that we're working on right now with both of my faith communities, is how can we better distribute our food resources.
All right, thank you. All right, the last question here we'll have for Michelle. The pandemic gives us an opportunity to try new things and make significant changes. In your communities that you're working in, what opportunities do you see for climate response in this time?
One of the projects that we have started, Lance Brisbois, who is one of my coworkers here, has started Lost Hills Natives Prairie Seed Project, and we started that last year, where we had volunteers come out and into public land and selectively hand harvest prairie seed, and then in partnership with Iowa Western Community College, propagated those seeds and then put them back out into public lands to actually, you know, reinvigorate or reestablish prairie. So working with our county conservation boards and the Nature Conservancy and Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation and other groups. what we have seen is that there's an incredible interest, and we have just seen a number of people that, like I said earlier, have never taken the opportunity to, hike a trail or be out in nature. And because of COVID, I think it's opened up that pathway and that doorway to people that have, been content to sit in their backyard and realize that there is this tremendous natural resource that runs the full coast of Iowa. And so, one of the projects that we've been working on the last couple of years through incentive grants from the Mid-American Energy Foundation has been to leverage partnerships to build out the outdoor recreation infrastructure as a means of partnership. And right now we are coming up on about $16 million of shared investments over the last 3 years to increase trails, to increase access to cabins, to giving people an opportunity to get out into the outdoors who maybe haven't used that. And for a couple of reasons. First of all, we know that that's going to attract a workforce. It's going to retain a workforce, that our next generation is interested in being engaged with the outdoors. And also, it's an opportunity for a new economic driver in areas that should not be farmed, that are not suitable for farming, but might be suitable for another economic input for our rural communities. And so, I think that the outdoor recreation aspect is something that has flourished under COVID. And hopefully it's something that we can continue when we're all healthy and safe again too.
Thank you. And thanks again to all the panelists for participating today. Matt will be coming back on video to end with a closing reflection. Matt, are you still there?
I'm still here. I think Irene has to there we go. Start my video. Okay. All right. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today for this important discussion, and really focus not only on the challenges, but the solutions. These are not challenges that we cannot solve and move forward, but as the discussion shows, they're challenging, they take investments, and they take us working together. So thank you for being a part of all of that. We close in reflection today with this Unitarian prayer. From all that dwells below the skies, let faith and hope with joy arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung through every land, by every tongue. May it be so.
For the panelists today for participating, and all participants who have joined us today. I know we didn't get to all of the questions, but we will try to interact with you individually to answer your questions if we can. Otherwise, again, this is being recorded, so we will be sending out the link to the recording so you can watch back if you would like. And I think that is all. Have a great day.